On behalf of the City of Yonkers and Untermeyer Gardens Conservancy, welcome back to Untermeyer Gardens. Here we are in midwinter, although the ground's not even frozen. It's been a very warm winter so far, but all our trees are dormant. So I want to take a few minutes and go through some of our winter pruning practices. We have a ginkgo biloba just here behind me that we planted about 8 years ago. It's been a very well-behaved tree. It hasn't required a lot of attention, but there's some very basic things I'd like to go over and show you some very basic pruning that you could be doing this winter as well. Before we get started in the tree, the first thing I like to do is go over some of the tools, or all the tools, you really need for small tree pruning. We're not going to be doing big work. We're not going to need a chainsaw today, but the most important tool in the garden all around, the only tool that I keep with me on my person at all times, are my bypass pruners. You want to keep them sharp and reasonably clean, so you can get in work and do with the little branches that you can manage with one hand. When we're doing a lot of prunings, I often leave these in my holster, and I need to reach for the same thing, just a bigger version. These are loppers. Again, a bypass pruner, which makes a much cleaner cut, makes it easier for the tree to heal after the cut is made. And again, being reasonably clean and very sharp is the key to that. Once we get beyond the size of branch that you can work with a lopper, you need to grab a pruning saw. What's interesting about these pruning saws, I find, is the teeth are arranged where they only cut on the pull stroke. So if you're climbing a tree or you're on a ladder, you don't have to push away from yourself to make the cut. It's all being pulled back toward you. It keeps you well balanced. And again, a sharp tool makes a clean cut, which makes a happy tree. We're lucky enough to have these orchard ladders. And what I love about these is really increased stability from a typical step ladder, but the fact that it's a tripod shape, you can reach this pole through the tree or through the shrub, and it gives you much more dexterity with your ladder than a typical step ladder, which has the rungs on both sides, and you really can't put the front end of your ladder into a border or a shrub. So it gives us much more dexterity to work around trees and shrubs. And again, it's quite a bit more stable with the tripod. This ladder won't walk on you like a step ladder tends to do if you're not on level ground. And then the other two tools I have on hand, when the ladder can't quite work, or if the tree's even bigger than we can reach with our ladders, is our pole saw. So it's the exact same pruning blade, but it's on a long pole. This is a 6-foot pole, which gives me that much reach. And if I need to go up to 12 feet, I can add an extension onto it. It just clips in, and we have a whole basket full of these extensions. So we can get 20, 30 feet away from the ground just using these pole saws with their extensions. And another version of that, which is kind of a version of my hand pruner and my lopper, is a pole pruner. So the same pruner, it's another bypass blade, keep it sharp and clean, and you can reach up from the ground, and with this rope you can actuate that bypass blade and get a lot of work done from the ground or from a short ladder and still reach well up into the canopy of any tree. So while I'm still on the ground, I want to talk about some of the very basics of pruning. Again, this ginkgo has been very well behaved and hasn't required a lot of pruning. It's best to do pruning when a tree is still young, before you're taking off too much of the canopy. But there's some very basic things I just want to cover today with crossing branches or branches that are growing through the center of the tree. And I have this first example here of a crossing branch. So this is a little wisp of a branch that is rubbing against a more established, older, bigger branch. And so obviously that's going to be a problem over time. As this branch gets bigger, the wind moves it around and it'll start to rub the bark off both sides. So we need to pick one and get rid of it. Obviously this smaller branch is less important to the tree, so we'll make a cut back here at the branch color and get rid of that one. The other type of branch, in addition to crossing branches we want, are branches that are crossing through the center of the tree. So I'm on the north side of the tree, and this particular small stick is growing through the center of the tree to the south. So I want to reach in and snip that one off too, and we're wanting to get all the growth to go to the outside of the canopy. Another example of a rubbing branch is a slightly bigger branch, and it has some small stems coming off of it that are rubbing on this main trunk already. And again, as this gets more caliper, more girth, it's going to rub even harder. The wind's going to move it around and cause injury to the tree. And while we're here, if you notice, there's sort of a tissue, a spongy, corky tissue that is the branch collar. You never want to cut into that. Different trees have different level of branch collars. White pines are almost impossible to see. Other trees have much more pronounced, and on the ginkgo it's reasonably pronounced. So you want to cut right where the branch tissue goes into this corky collar, cut it right at that level. I may have been able to use my loppers instead of my pruners and get a nice clean cut that way. So now we're going to avoid any injury from these branches rubbing on each other. So I'm up on my orchard ladder that's threaded through the lower canopy of the tree, and looking around, and again our focus is on rubbing branches, or again what I call crossing branches, branches that go through the canopy instead of out to the edge of the canopy. So you can see here in a windstorm or maybe a raccoon climbing in the tree that this branch got broken off beyond its bud there. So that invites fungus or bacteria or any other kind of injury. And so I think I want to get rid of this branch, but maybe I also want to think about where it's going to go. If I would cut it just above this bud, I'd be creating new growth that goes back through the canopy, and it would be a crossing branch eventually, so we don't want that. So I might look at snipping it here, and it would grow back out toward the outside of the canopy where I want it to go, but it's headed right through toward another established branch. So I think we're just going to use a brave cut and get rid of that branch entirely back to the collar. I can see as I move around, there's a strange branch that comes from one of the main trunks, goes back in and is rubbing and is crossing through the canopy. So it's a rubbing and crossing branch. So I'm going to reach down here and find a way to snip that one off at the branch collar, throw that down onto my tarp. And again, this tree's not in bad shape. I won't have to spend much time up here, but I did notice as I was coming up and I'll squeeze back through the canopy, there's a fairly large branch that's wanting to act a bit like a leader. It's competing for the lead up toward the top, but it comes out and crosses and rubs again. So this is another example of the two things we're after today, is the crossing and rubbing branches. It's a little bit too big for me to comfortably cut with a clean cut with my hand shears, with my pruners. So I'm going to step down and use my loppers, find that branch collar again, and snip that one out. This is a fairly large amount of leaf and bud that I'm taking out of the tree, but again, trying to see what the tree will want and how it will move in the future, and I don't think we'll miss that branch at all. This tree could use some thinning cuts as well, which maybe we'll talk about in the future, but if you look at all your trees for crossing or rubbing branches and try to get those out of the way, your tree's going to look better and it's going to be much happier moving into the future as far as its health's concerned. Thanks for hanging out in the winter at Untermyer. We'll talk to you soon.